Welcome back. Bringing in a new chief of staff a week after bringing in a new communications director is a big deal this early in a new administration, a sign to many here in Washington of a fundamental discipline and management problem at the Trump White House. But the president, listen to him earlier today, he has a different take.
We were discussing a little while ago before the meeting how well we're doing, however. We have the highest stock market in history. We have GDP on Friday, got very little mention, although I guess in the business areas it did, but got, I think, very little mention. 2.6 is a number that nobody thought they'd see for a long period of time. Unemployment is the lowest it's been in 17 years. Business enthusiasm is about as high as they've ever seen it. In fact, it is as high, the highest point in 28 years, according to a certain graph and a certain chart.
That's the president at the cabinet meeting, a certain graph and a certain chart. We know he likes visuals. I assume he means either the University of Michigan or the Business Roundtable studies that do show the president's right. There is more optimism in the economy. They see deregulation from the administration. They're betting on tax reform. The markets could change if the tax reform conversation goes south in Congress. But at the moment, the president's right when he says highest stock market ever, closes with a record just about every day. It was going up at the end of the Obama administration, but he's the president now. He gets the credit. He echoed that point in a tweet earlier this morning. If we could put it up on the screen. I won't read the whole thing because it's redundant to what you just heard the president say, but at the very end of the tweet he says, no White House chaos. Now, he's pushing back because he's been paying attention to the media all weekend with the appointment of General Kelly. You don't expect a president to come out and say, my product's a mess, my White House is a mess. But I guess back to the question, what is his understanding of what he needs? That's the biggest question.
I think that's an open question. I mean, the reality here is, as Julie was saying earlier, there are no major legislative achievements. And this is happening at a time when Republicans control this town, all branches of the government, for the first time in a decade. And that is the frustration of Republicans, that they have not seized on this moment. The first 6 months of an administration are supposed to be the easy part, not the hard part. It gets harder from here going forward. So, yes, the stock market is good. He might not want to have too much ownership of that, because if it goes in the other direction, then he'll own that as well. But I think the thing that's frustrating Republicans, if things are going well, they are not going well on Capitol Hill. They're going home without any accomplishments. And tax reform is an open question, to say the very least here, because that was incumbent on health care reform, which hasn't happened as well here. So we'll see if it changes going forward. But they need a legislative win of some kind, or anyone on the ballot next year is nervous.
And they need a legislative win. John Kelly's expertise is not legislation. That doesn't mean he can't be an effective chief of staff and reach out to the major players in Congress, talk to the president, reach out to the agencies to get things done. Sometimes coming at it with a fresh set of eyes actually helps. But what does it tell us about inside the White House? Let's look at the departures in the 6 months of this administration. 2 of them from the National Security Council, General Flynn and a woman he brought in, Katie McFarland. They are both leaving. Set that aside. That is because Flynn had his own problems that aren't related to policy. It's related to the Russia investigation. Katie McFarland going out when H.R. McMaster came in. She's going to be ambassador to Singapore, I believe. But the other 4, Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, the former Communications Director Mike Dubke, Sean Spicer, the Press Secretary, Katie Walsh, the Deputy Chief of Staff. That was your Washington Republican National Committee establishment. Worked at the Republican National Committee when members of Congress or some of the interest groups in town who are used to the way Washington works wanted to talk to somebody at the White House. Those are the people they went to. They are gone. What does that tell us? Is the president saying, goodbye Republican Party, goodbye Washington Republican Party? What's the message?
Well, part of it is that the Republican Party managed to elect a president while going through a very ugly divorce. And now they're continuing to go through this divorce while governing the country. And that divide is illustrated in all of this, in the legislation, which Trump doesn't have any particular position on, and therefore was not bully pulpiting a ton to push for any of these things, and sometimes undercutting what they were doing. With the staff, it means that the GOP union with the New York forces and the Trump family not going smoothly, and those guys are out at this point. I think that is the central problem with all of this. It comes back to that Trump as a very odd manager who likes some chaos. And in fact, they were already in chaos before they got here.
Does this officially make him our first independent president?
Well, I'm interested to see what happens next now that Kelly's taking over with Mike Pence, because he is still a traditional old guard, old GOP Republican, contacts with Congress. They trotted him out to speak in Estonia. Is that a sign that he's actually going to take a bigger role, and actually there might be actually a more cohesive voice of the standard GOP coming out under a Kelly leadership, or is that just a one-off and now he's going to be muzzled? Because remember, all of this started because Flynn did not represent his conversations with the Russians appropriately to Pence. Pence was out of the loop. Does Pence get brought back into the loop? Because then that's a sign that maybe the divorce is healing.
To that point, though,
So
they have Tom Price at Health and Human
Yep.
Services. They have Mick Mulvaney, the budget director. They have Mike Pence. 3 traditional conservatives, all from the House. Mike Pence went on to be Indiana governor first, all from the House. Far more conservative than Trump, the 3 of those, without a doubt. The question is, though, the president has been mad at both Price and Pence for not being able to get the votes on health care. So where do we go here, and how does we're doing this in the context of the new chief of staff? You know, what next? How do they fix that?
I think one of the questions is whether Trump does start moving in a direction that some people thought he actually might, because he's not an ideologue, which is to try to find some Democrats. You know, not the Democratic Party as a whole, but those Democrats that are running next year in states that Trump won. Does he start making some overtures there? Does he maybe throw infrastructure back on the board? But it's important to talk about this in context with some of the other things we saw happen last week. One, on health care. It is clear that Republicans are not afraid of Donald Trump on these big legislative decisions. And maybe even more important, the pushback that he got across the board from Republicans when he started floating this idea of getting rid of Jeff Sessions, that to me was very telling. You don't want to overstate it. It's not that Republicans have completely walked away from him. I don't expect that anytime soon. But there are now moments when they are not afraid to stand up to him.
He also said, and it got lost in all of this in the interview with the Wall Street Journal, that he was open to raising taxes on the rich. And so I just want to bring
tax reform is going to go great.
Tax reform, but I want to bring a contrarian view in. Here's Chris Collins, a Republican member of Congress from upstate New York, the Buffalo area, who says that those of us who are saying this is all bad aren't paying attention.
This has been a great week for the president. You know, I was at the Jamboree, 40,000 Boy Scouts shouting, "We love Trump, we love Trump." Banning transgenders, which is probably supported by the vast majority of Americans. He's dealing with North Korea. He's dealing with Russia. And now he has solidified the inner circle of the West Wing with John Kelly, with Anthony Scaramucci, 2 great individuals. I think it's all coming together extremely well.
The Boy Scouts had to apologize for what the president's tone, his words, and his political tone. Police departments are now distancing themselves from something the president said on Friday about essentially a message, rough them up a little bit when you throw them into the paddy wagon. But when you hear Chris Collins, there is a Trump base out there that elected him president. Is that Kool-Aid? Like unrealistic denial Kool-Aid, or out in America, is there a different take?
Well, he's right in some respects, no question. People view this as, he's being Trump, he's being a strong leader. But the thing that is missing in that sort of, long list
hard to find a word for it,
is a legislative achievement. That is something that Republicans control the Senate and the House. They should be able to get something done. There's no leadership from the White House happening here, though. But I think the one thing that the president has done, he's united the Democratic Party against him now. Again, had he started with infrastructure reform, he would have divided the Democratic Party. So I think it's very difficult to go back to that.
And hold your breath, because we're going to continue the conversation. Dividing the Democratic Party, you say, is he also about to divide the Republican Party further? The president says he has a new plan to revive Obamacare repeal efforts. Tell Republican senators they look like fools, and threaten to take away their health care.
If you've been
Is President Trump ready to move on after last week's big fail on Republican efforts to dismantle Obamacare? Short answer, it appears not. Instead, throwing around taunts and threats at his own party in the aftermath, including this statement he put out on Twitter just a short time ago. If Obamacare is hurting people, and it is, why shouldn't it hurt the insurance companies, and why should Congress not be paying what public pays? But there's more to it than meets the eye. Or the tweet, I guess, in this case. We will get to that. CNN's national correspondent Suzanne Malveaux joins me live right now from Capitol Hill. So, Suzanne, what is the president threatening right now?
Kate, what we've seen over the weekend is the combination of threats, cajoling, shaming, whatever you want to call it here. But essentially what he's saying is that he is not going to provide, or the government is not going to provide, bailouts for insurance companies, and what he calls bailouts for members of Congress. The way that most members of Congress get their insurance is through the D.C. exchange, which in part is subsidized by the federal government under Obamacare. Now, what the president has been saying pretty consistently is that he's going to allow Obamacare to implode. There are a couple of threats that seem quite serious. One of them is to take away the government subsidies to insurance companies, those contributions they make that actually allow low-income folks to afford coverage, and that would be in the tune of maybe perhaps as much as $7 billion. The other thing that he is talking about is not enforcing the individual mandate, which really allows and requires that young, healthy people are part of the system. So those are the things that he is tossing out. But there is definitely, Kate, this back and forth, this blame game that continues. And the real question is whether or not there are going to be Democrats and Republicans who are willing to continue to find a solution, or at least ways to tinker around the edges, the problems that are facing Obamacare. This one congressman from earlier this morning says, no, the Democrats own it.
They are going to wear it. You know, we said to America, and America agrees, Obamacare has failed. It's failing. It's imploding. I have suggested to the president we absolutely end the cost-sharing revenues on Tuesday. That's tomorrow, to insurance companies.
So that was Chris Collins. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, she has a different idea. And of course, what she wants to do is bring Republicans and Democrats together to try to figure out ways to stabilize the market. There is also another group on the House side called the Problem Solvers Caucus. They are trying to do the same thing, Kate. So we'll see how this goes.
We will have to see. Chris Collins, Susan Collins, no relation and definitely not on the same page when it comes to health care either. Great to see you, Suzanne. Joining me right now to discuss, CNN senior political commentator Rick Santorum. He's, of course, a former Republican senator and former Republican presidential candidate. Also with me, CNN political commentator and Republican strategist Ana Navarro. Hello, friends. Senator, first to you. Cutting off payments to the insurers, the payments are used to help low-income folks afford coverage. Is that a good idea as a next step in your mind?
You know, I think the president has to start to get tough with these Republicans who are walking away from trying to fix health care. And if it means shaking up the system a little bit for the short term, I think that's not a bad thing. If you look at what insurance companies have already baked in, the fact that this money is going to go away with their increases for next year. So I don't think it'll be a huge shock to the industry, but it will be a shock to Washington. And look, I think the president has to take some leadership here. I think he wants to do that. As I've said many times, I think he needs to go outside of Washington. Washington has failed, and now it's time to do what we did back in 1996 when we did the last entitlement reform on welfare, and that is to go outside of Washington, to bring in our Republican governors from around the country, meet and come up with a solution that drains the swamp, gets the money out of Washington, puts it back in the hands of governors. And this is something that, in my opinion, should have been done from the beginning. It's to paraphrase Winston Churchill's, Republicans will do the right thing after they've tried everything else first. So they failed on everything else. Now it's time to get the right solution that worked in the past. And Donald Trump can be the savior here. He can be the leader in working with Republican governors outside of Washington to make this happen.
So you've got the Rick Santorum of the world saying, buck up, fellas and ladies, let's get to it and let's get to the business of it and continue fighting to reform the healthcare system. But Anna, Republicans on the Hill, they seem to not be there. They seem ready to move on to tax reform, leave the healthcare fight for another day, or leave it completely. I don't know. But if you look at the president's Twitter feed, I think it counted up as almost a dozen tweets on health care or the process in the Senate that he was attacking just over the weekend. He's not ready to let it go. Where does that leave everybody?
Well, here's the problem. First of all, you know that Donald Trump is a dog with a bone. He never lets go of anything, right? And this for him was a huge political blow. It was a blow to his ego. He's the art of the deal guy. He couldn't get the deal done. He's never going to let it go. And frankly, he shouldn't let it go. And the American people shouldn't let it go. And Congress shouldn't let it go, because this is a system that needs to be fixed. Not doing anything is not an option. There are too many flaws with Obamacare as is, and it's going to end up collapsing if it is not. So if there's not a solution offered. But there's a bigger problem here. Like when I've been hearing this entire discussion right now, and folks are talking about Democrats are going to wear it or Republicans failed. The president is flogging Congress and flogging the Senate for having failed. What's not being talked about are the people who need insurance. What's not being talked about are the lives that are at risk. And so at some point, we got to stop seeing this as a political chess game, and we've got to start seeing it as an American crisis that needs to be solved and put the focus where it needs to be.
Well, and what you're talking about, Anna, the president spoke to directly just on Friday. Senator, let me play it for you. This is, I guess we could consider it another route that the president is suggesting that Congress can go. It's basically just leave it and let it implode on its own. Listen to this.
You know, I said from the beginning, let Obamacare implode and then do it. I turned out to be right. Let Obamacare implode.
So is that the president trying to work for a solution? I mean, do you endorse that move, Senator?
Look, I think anything the president could do to shock the system here, to get them to continue to work on this, is a good thing. And I agree with Chris.
So you think maybe he doesn't believe it? It's that he's just trying to scare him straight?
Look, the president wants a success here. He doesn't want Obamacare to implode on his watch and him just sit there and do nothing about it. He wants to fix this problem. That's why he's tweeting. That's why he's pushing Congress. Look, this is an opportunity for Donald Trump to show that he can lead. This is an opportunity that he can say, look, we're not going to do the Washington way. We're going to go outside. We're going to bring people in, Democrats and Republicans. We're going to get input on this. We're going to get this money out of Washington. We're going to get it back to the states. We're going to let Democratic and Republican governors and their legislatures, fix this problem, get rid of Washington-centric health care, and let the states do what they do best, which we saw under welfare, which is deliver services closer to the people. This is exactly what he campaigned on. Now he has an opportunity to do that.
But I thought it was horrible. I think his words are not only irresponsible, I think they're also inhumane. What are we going to do if Obamacare implodes? And I can see, where he's tempted to do that. Now, it's easy for him to do that. He is a rich guy with health insurance. Everybody in his family, everybody he cares about has health insurance. But there are very many Americans who need Obamacare on it right now. What are we going to do with those sick people if it implodes? What are we going to tell them? What are we going to tell the parents of those children? What are we going to tell the spouses? What are we going to tell these Americans? So I think that's just, at some point, get over the defeat, get over the political posturing, and get back to work. Get back to forming a plan that actually works. Get the input from Republican governors and from Democrat governors. Get bipartisan leadership to start working it and do what Congress is supposed to do. Compromise and address a national crisis now.
Well, what will happen, at least as it stands now, if they would let it stand and implode? It seems the left and the right are just going to point the finger at each other. But let me ask you about. Let me start with you, Ann, on one thing that we have seen change in Washington. Your reaction to General John Kelly stepping in now as chief of staff, Reince Priebus out. Do you think this changes everything?
I don't think it changes everything because, frankly, I have never seen a staff or a level of functionality of an office that is not an accurate reflection of the principal. The principal here is Donald Trump. Now, I will tell you, I know John Kelly. I got to know him well in Miami when he was Southcom commander. He is excellent. He is a leader. He commands respect and authority, and he doesn't have much patience for fools and for lack of discipline. So I think folks like Scaramucci, I think a lot of the folks that are in that Oval Office right now that have had walk-in rights, that Oval Office it almost feels like it's a public bathroom where anybody can go in at any moment and whisper into the president's ear. I think he's going to bring some order to that. The question is, can he change Donald Trump? Good luck with that. Any woman that's tried to set him, change a man set in his ways can tell you it takes more than a general. It takes a miracle.
Senator, let me ask you this. With Reince Priebus out, do you have a concern that the president has fewer and fewer, no ties to the party left in his inner circle?
Well, I mean, he has Steve Bannon, which is real important. That's a base that is very important to this president, and I think that'll continue.
Wasn't the quote basically he wanted to blow up the Republican Party at one point?
Well, he doesn't have any sort of traditional Republicans like a Reince Priebus, but the bottom line is most of the people working in his administration throughout there are Republicans, have been active Republicans for a long time. So I'm not that concerned about that. The bottom line for General Kelly is he's a Marine. He's someone who gets the marching orders and tries to execute. And I think that's going to be the most important thing he could bring to it, is really just this idea of being able to execute the game plan and follow through. So hopefully that will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the White House.
We will see. This is one day I can just say that a whole bunch of times and no one can correct me on it. Great to see you both. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
President Trump under fire for encouraging police to rough up suspects during their arrests. Now the nation's police departments are pushing back against the president, the man who called himself the law and order candidate. And Vladimir Putin strikes back at the U.S. over impending sanctions, booting hundreds of employees from Russian missions. U.S. missions in Russia, with the warning that this may be just the beginning. Thank you so much, Poppy. Hello, everyone. I am Kate Baldwin. Welcome to the first day of the rest of the Trump presidency. A fresh start this morning with a fresh face as the new White House Chief of Staff, retired General and former Homeland Security Chief John Kelly, sworn in a short time ago to replace Reince Priebus, followed by a cabinet meeting that included a not-so-fresh face, or a lesser fresh face, Attorney General Jeff Sessions right now. His relationship with President Trump has turned remarkably sour in a remarkably short amount of time. Moments ago, the two were in the same room and face-to-face for the first time since the president kicked off his public shaming of Sessions. So with Priebus out and Kelly in, is it all sunshine and rainbows at the moment? The president seems to think so.
Good morning. This is our first cabinet meeting with General Kelly. He will be Chief of Staff, as you know. We all know him. We respect him, admire what he's done. And at Homeland, what he has done has been nothing short of miraculous. I predict that General Kelly will go down in terms of the position of Chief of Staff, one of the great ever. And we're going to have a good time, but much more importantly, we're going to work hard. And we're going to make America great again.
Also touted a lot of the successes of the presidency so far in that cabinet meeting, talking about economic numbers. So can the new chief of staff help jumpstart the president's agenda today? Lots of ground to cover on that. Let's start with CNN's Sarah Murray, who is live at the White House. So, Sarah, despite the past week, just forget it all, the president says. I mean, the president denied any hint of a problem within his White House today.
That's right. But look, we all know that you don't oust your chief of staff and replace them with a retired four-star general if you do not want a change in direction in the way things are going in this White House. And even staffers who are working in the West Wing are hopeful that John Kelly will bring some kind of fresh start, that he might bring a little bit more order, a little bit of a quieter West Wing, one that's been plagued with staff infighting and backbiting. But they're also hoping that he can help sort of kickstart the Trump agenda. The reality is the president had a bruising defeat last week. We saw healthcare collapse, and as much as President Trump wants to blame it on the Democrats, that was at the hands of members of his own party. So everyone is kind of waiting to see if the dynamic really will change under Kelly. And of course, there's some skepticism about that because everyone knows the tone is set at the top, and many people near the White House, close to the White House in Washington, aren't convinced that President Trump is prepared to change. Kate?
Yeah, the chief of staff you can change. The president, is he prepared to change, or has he changed? We will see, and probably the next 24 hours. Great to see you, Sarah. Thank you. Join me now to discuss right now CNN senior political analyst Mark Preston and Chris Whipple. He's the author of The Gatekeepers, How the White House Chiefs of Staff Define Every Presidency. Appropriate today. Thank you for joining us, Chris. Great to see you both. Try this one on for size. How is this for expectation setting? He will go down as one of the greats ever.
Ever. I mean, it's just ever. I mean, is there anybody he ever hires or he associates himself with, he always says that they will be the greatest, they will do the greatest, they will become the greatest. It's just Trumpisms at its best.
But has John Kelly taking on the post, has the West Wing fundamentally changed today?
No. Well, a couple things. One, and we were talking a little bit about this in the green room, I don't think the general is going to be able to go in and necessarily change Donald Trump, but can he go in and organizationally change everyone below Donald Trump? And in some ways, perhaps just ignore what Donald Trump does with the tweeting and what have you, and really try to enact change and try to get things done by working downward and then up to Capitol Hill.
Well, and that kind of gets to an interesting point. I mean, you have said, I've seen you say, Chris, that it's mission impossible for General Kelly if he doesn't have control over the West Wing. Why is that, and what does that look like, that control?
Look, I think the first thing that Kelly has to do is he has to figure out, is he working for a presidency or is he working for a TV reality show? I mean, this White House has been profoundly stupid and, quite frankly, unserious about governing for the first 6 months. It can't do anything right. A guy like Scaramucci shouldn't be within 100 miles of a functioning White House. And I think Kelly's first task is really, if he hasn't removed Scaramucci's White House credentials by Friday, I think he's failed on job one. Failing that, I think it has to be clear that Scaramucci and everybody else reports to the president through Kelly. If they don't, with the possible exception of the family and Bannon, if they don't, this cannot work.
So that means if the structure as is of yesterday remains in place, it doesn't matter who becomes chief of staff. Why is that gatekeeper role so essential? What aren't people getting?
The definition of insanity would be for John Kelly to try to take this job with the same authority that Reince Priebus had. We saw how that turned out. You know, the last time we had a general, by the way, as White House chief, it was Al Haig under Jerry Ford after Nixon resigned. That was a disaster, and the reason it was a disaster is that Ford had the same idea Trump did. He thought he could run the White House by himself. Everybody had access to the Oval. They came and went willy-nilly. It was a disaster, and he wound up begging Don Rumsfeld to come in, empowered Rumsfeld, and he almost caught Jimmy Carter in the election as a result. But if you don't do that, history is littered with the bones of presidencies that didn't understand. You have to have an empowered White House chief.
Mark, kind of getting to a little bit what Chris is talking about. Peter Baker of the New York Times had a fascinating interview with one of the I think would go down as the greats in terms of the chief of staff, James Baker, and he said that Baker said that the job boils down to either focusing on the chief part of your title or focusing on the of staff part of your title. Success kind of coming through, and he says the success really is coming through focusing on the staff. What do you think the challenges are that Kelly is up against, if that's the case?
Well, loyalties that from those that are already in position right now, including the family, mind you, Ivanka and Jared, the loyalties that they have to the president and not necessarily to the office. So Scaramucci is a perfect example of somebody who says that he is going to come in and he's going to shake things up and that everyone needs to be loyal to the president and that he's going to fire anyone that isn't. Well, the fact of the matter is those in the West Wing who hold those positions should be loyal to the president and the fact that they're trying to get his agenda passed. But first and foremost, they have to be loyal to the Constitution, and they have to be loyal to the idea of getting things done. So what we can't have, quite frankly, is this weekend to have Donald Trump come out and say, let's get back and do health care, when you have the Senate Republican leader, who is a very good tactician, saying on Thursday and Friday, okay, we didn't get health care done, it's time to move on. You can't have that mixed message.
Go ahead.
Here's a troubling thing to me is I've talked to some of the ex-White House chiefs who have not had a phone call from Kelly. The first thing any really serious White House chief should do, is to pick up the phone to Jim Baker, the gold standard, and then to call Ken Duberstein, for example, who was Reagan's successful last chief of staff. Duberstein came in in a similar circumstance in a way. Reagan was on the ropes with the Iran-Contra scandal. There was a possibility of being impeached. Howard Baker and Duberstein sat down with Reagan. They decided that if he lied to them, they were going to resign. I think Kelly needs to go into the Oval Office, sit down with Donald Trump and draw a red line and say, if you want to have your tweets, fine. But if you tell a demonstrable lie on Twitter, I'm gone. You can find a third White House chief.
One thing that was fascinating that I just saw this morning is much of what you heard the president in complimenting General Kelly on was his work over at the Department of Homeland Security, what he's done with the border, what he's done with immigration. Do you know who was working lockstep, hand in hand with General Kelly on that? Jeff Sessions over at Justice. I did a joint interview with Kelly and Sessions to talk just about immigration and the border and the efforts that they're taking on. But you've got one of them who's getting accolades and the other who is on the outs of all outs.
And that's why, I mean, the whole issue of loyalty is not to the person, it should be to the country and to the Constitution. We've seen Jeff Sessions, who showed unrestrained loyalty to Donald Trump all last year at a time when all his Republicans in Congress thought he was crazy for backing him. And then what have we seen? We saw that President Trump, has turned on Jeff Sessions. We see that Rex Tillerson over at the State Department supposedly is having troubles right now with the White House. Doesn't feel like the White House has his back. So if you're General Kelly, you got to think to yourself, to Chris's point, look, if you lie, if you're not with me on these things, then I'm out. It'll be interesting if he actually had that conversation.
What is John Kelly's not going to, who knows how many interviews he's going to do. What is the signal, the sign, the indication you're going to get if there's a change? What are you looking for to see?
Well, you're looking for an end to Trump's unrestrained use of Twitter. You're looking for discipline. You're looking for, this White House is completely broken right now. There would be a massive repair job. First of all, it can't pass legislation. It can't issue executive orders that are enforceable. It can't prioritize the president's agenda. Nobody knows what that is. It can't get anybody on the same page. Those are all the things that in a healthy, functioning White House, they all come down from the White House Chief of Staff. You can have robust debate. You can have Bannon arguing with everybody else. But at the end of the day, when the president makes a decision, everybody needs to fall in behind the White House Chief of Staff and execute it. That's how you'll know if this is working.
So that lays it out very easy. He's got an easy job ahead of him starting today.
Very
That
easy.
seems very obvious from this discussion.
Piece of cake.
Yeah, that's the name of your next book.
Right.
Piece of Cake, The Life of a Chief of Staff. Great to see you, Chris. Thank you so much. Great to see you as well. President Trump daring Republicans to act on health care after last week's big failure, including his threat to cut off help to low-income Americans under Obamacare. Plus, Russia's revenge. Vladimir Putin ordering hundreds of American diplomats out after Congress votes to slap Moscow with new sanctions. Now the Kremlin says this is just the beginning. And what is it about Chris Christie and sporting events? Honestly, a new chapter when the New Jersey governor confronts a heckler basically nose to nose. See what happened.
President Trump urging Congress to get back to work on health care or he will, quote, let Obamacare implode. The president is also threatening to cut subsidies to Congress people and insurance companies that cover low-income Americans. Just moments ago, he tweeted this: if Obamacare is hurting people, and it is, why shouldn't it hurt the insurance companies, and why should Congress not be paying what the public pays? Let's discuss with Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. He's a member of the Appropriations Committee. Senator, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be with you, Allison.
Let's start with that question that the president poses one more time. If Obamacare is hurting people, why shouldn't it hurt the insurance companies? And why should Congress not be paying what the public pays? What is the answer to that?
Well, first of all, Obamacare is not hurting people. In fact, what would have really hurt people was if we had passed Trump Care. And we know from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office that that would have thrown tens of millions of Americans off of affordable care.
Right, but you know not everyone is delighted with Obamacare, and that people have grave reservations about it.
Allison, nobody has said it's perfect. We've said from the very beginning we need to improve the exchanges. The first order of business is for the president to stop trying to sabotage the exchanges. There are a couple things that are totally within the power of the Trump administration. Number one, the cost-sharing payments that you just mentioned. Those have been going on for a long time. He's threatening to cut them off. That has created uncertainty, and that's why you have insurance companies threatening to increase premiums. Number two, enforce the individual mandates so you don't just have sicker, more intense care patients in the exchanges. Three, make sure you advertise the fact that the exchanges are now open and people should enroll. Congress can then get back to the regular order, as Senator McCain said, and work on a number of other things to both strengthen the exchanges in the short term, but also we should work on things like reducing the cost of prescription drugs and other things that we can do on a bipartisan basis.
The president seems to be suggesting that you in Congress, that members of Congress are sponging off the system somehow and you don't deserve subsidies or any federal dollars. What's your response to that one?
Actually, that's just flat out untrue. Members of Congress are in the exchanges like anybody else. Members of Congress are treated like every other federal employee that works for the United States government. So the president is actually just trying to stir the pot as usual on these issues. He doesn't have the facts on his side as usual. I'm hopeful that you're going to have Republicans in the Senate and the House now saying that they want to work with Democrats. Time to ignore the president's tweets. The president has also, threatened Senate Republicans and said that they should go to a different voting system. Why don't we just focus on working together to improve the exchanges in the short term and then work on these bigger issues like reducing the cost of prescription drugs? I think within the exchanges we should offer a public option in the exchanges. That would create more competition. It would drive down prices.
One more thing on this, because we just had Congressman Chris Collins on, who wanted to remind everyone that the subsidies were, that House Republicans actually sued the Obama administration over these subsidies that the president seems very focused on, and that a district judge ruled that they were illegal because Congress didn't appropriate them. You're on the Appropriations Committee. How can you justify these subsidies that your committee, that Congress didn't ever approve?
Well, the original legislation essentially directed funding for these payments, these cost-sharing payments, in order to provide stability in the exchanges. If my Republican colleagues want to join together and vote through the appropriations process to provide those payments on an annual basis, that's fine. Even better would be if Congress got together on a bipartisan basis to pass legislation that mandated the cost-sharing payments going forward. But as you indicated, the courts have asked questions about that. I should point out
and decided,
that,
right? I mean, this district court decided that it was illegal.
A lower court level made a decision, but and importantly, they did not direct that the payments end. That is really important. I mean, they made a decision, but they said the payments can continue as that case was contested in the higher courts. So there's nothing to prevent the president at this point in time from continuing the cost-sharing payments. In fact, he's been doing it, but he's been doing it on a month-to-month basis instead of providing the certainty that everybody needs going into the fall. So he's been doing that. And there's no reason for him to stop doing that now, other than the fact that he might want to sabotage the system.
Senator, I want to read to you, there's another new tweet from the president that just came out. I've not read it yet, so we're going to put it here, I think, on the screen so that we can all read it together. Highest stock market ever. Best economic numbers in years. Unemployment lowest in 17 years. Wages rising. Border secure. No White House chaos. Your response?
Well, let's just start at the end. I mean, obviously, there's incredible chaos in the White House, which is why they're bringing in General Kelly. I think the struggle for General Kelly is going to be that normally a White House chief of staff has to try and organize the staff. In this case, you have a commander-in-chief who is totally out of control, tweeting at all hours of the day and night, and there's no consistency to the policy. I should point out that when it comes to the economy, you're continuing to see what you saw under the previous administration, which is continued growth. But the reality is there are lots of Americans who are still being very squeezed between rising costs and flat paychecks, which is why, Allison, the Democrats on a bicameral basis, House and Senate, have put forward a plan to focus on the economy, to focus on bread and butter issues, and come forth with concrete measures we can take to improve the economy, improve jobs, and also wages.
Well, look, I mean, I think his point is that despite whatever's going on in the White House, the stock market is having a banner month or banner run, the highest ever. Unemployment rate has dropped to the lowest in anyone's memory, recent memory at least. So, I mean, I think that the president would say his point is that things on that front seem to be working.
Well, as I say, there are millions of Americans that are really hurting. The reality is that what you're seeing under President Trump is a continuation of what was a steady decline in unemployment. You saw that beginning under the administration of Barack Obama. They had a record number of months of economic growth, and that is continuing under President Trump. The trajectory that began under President Obama, both in terms of jobs and reducing the unemployment rate. Stock market was up under President Obama as well. But that doesn't mean that there aren't millions of Americans who aren't hurting. The reality is folks at the top are doing very well. Yes, if you've got a lot of money in the stock market, you're doing just great. But everybody else is being squeezed, and people are working harder than ever. The gains are going to the top 1%, folks at the very top.
Yeah.
Everybody else is seeing flat paychecks, or they're falling behind, which is exactly, Allison, why we put forward a plan to begin to address those issues so we can grow the economy, but also do it with more shared prosperity.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, thanks so much for taking time to be on New Day.
Thank you.
John.
All right, a tropical storm forms in the Gulf of Mexico. Who is in the storm's path? That's next.
Out.
So President Trump's election win surprised much of the country. And tonight, there's a new CNN special hosted by Feuds that explores why Trump won. Let's take a look.
The happiest people tend to be the people that are making a nice income, that really enjoy their life and their family life, and not the people of tremendous wealth that are constantly driven to achieve more and more success. You're expected to be a certain kind of a person, and maybe you're not necessarily cut out to be that kind of a person.
How did that Donald Trump become this Donald Trump?
I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
Joining us now is Feuds Zakaria, host of CNN's Feuds Zakaria GPS. Feuds, great to see you. Answer your own question. How did that sort of, what we see there looks like a more gentle, sort of romantic Donald Trump talking about how love should prevail over ambition and work, become the candidate Trump we saw there?
I think what you see in that part of the documentary is the sort of reinvention of Donald Trump. You begin to realize that the person he is now is a carefully honed persona that he created through trial and error, taking advantage of opportunities. And I think there are a few key moments in his life. The first is he began to realize the power of celebrity and the value of celebrity. And The Apprentice, for a while, not as much long as he says, was the #1 show, 28 million people watching it. I think that made him realize, my God, this is powerful stuff. That's when he really gets out of the real estate business and goes into the branding business. But then he also starts feeling the currents of America in very much an intuitive way. I don't think he had any articulated sense. And he began to feel a few things. The anger against politicians. Remember, he runs on the Reform Party. He tries to run on the Reform Party ticket for a while. And then he begins to see the toxic energy on the far right. Remember, his first political moves are birtherism.
Absolutely.
And he knew that the election of a black president had stirred a kind of ugly racial animus among some people, probably a small subset, but he knew a way to get directly to them. So all of it combined, and it was the man met his moment. The point at which Donald Trump is elected is literally the low point in trust for politicians in Washington. It's a 50-year low. And that's when Donald Trump, so he got his timing right, which all great performers need.
About the man right there, and we saw that crippler lover, not a fighter moment. But then there's the moment. Talk to me about the moment, Feuds, the sort of socioeconomic hunger that existed, or to an extent still exists in the United States.
I think the part of it that I was most impressed by in doing the research for this is we know about the economics, we know about the hollowed out factories and the coal mines, and what I was struck by was the other two factors. So that's, if you will, capitalism. The other factor is culture, a real sense of cultural alienation that older, white, non-college educated Americans have, the sense that their country is changing because of immigrants, because maybe blacks are rising up to a kind of central place in society, because of gays being accorded equal rights, because of, frankly, a lot of working women. Everybody is sort of muscling in on a territory that, if you think about it, the white working man had. But the final one is class, social class. We don't talk about it a lot, but the election of Donald Trump is really a kind of class rebellion against people like us, educated professionals who live in cities, who have, cosmopolitan views about a lot of things. And I think there's a whole part of America that is sick and tired of being told what to do by this, overeducated professional elite that Hillary Clinton in many ways perfectly represented. And that's why they're sticking with him.
Yes, and that's why when Democrats think, oh, how long can this go on? Surely the chaos will mean that he would never be reelected. Those factors that you're talking about that got him elected haven't changed. They still exist in the foreseeable future to 2020.
I think that if you think about one of those Trump voters, imagine what it would mean for them to say, you know what, I was wrong about Donald Trump and the New York Times was right. They're not going to do that. They're going to, there's a lot of stickiness to his support.
So what shakes that then? If anything, Feuds, does it have to be a different view of what America has become to them, or a sense that President Donald Trump has failed to deliver on the things that they were expecting him to deliver on?
It's a great question. The research shows that people don't vote so much on policy issues. I mean, there are studies that show at the end of an election, you ask people what party stood for what policies, and about more than a third get it wrong. They think the Democrats are for repealing the ACA and the Republicans are in favor. What they vote for is, does this guy get me? Does this person know me? Is he the kind of person? We have David Brooks on the program saying, what they ask themselves is this party full of people who look like me, who are like the people I hung out with in high school? And that's almost like a tribal team loyalty. So I don't think that, I don't have a good answer for what will shake it. I think what could change it is if you found a Democrat. No, the Democrats are all sitting there worrying about what exact economic policy they should have and should they be more, left-wing. I think the key is, can you connect? Bill Clinton had very, kind of centrist policies, but he connected. A white working-class voter looked at him and said, this guy gets me. And unfortunately, they didn't feel that way about Hillary.
Appreciate it very much. Let's get some reaction. Mike Rogers, first to you. What do you think?